I'm a Theodore Roosevelt reprisor. Some people might say impersonator or reenactor. I call myself a reprisor. It's kind of like Q-tip or Kleenex. It's a word I made up. It comes from the Constitution, the enumerated powers of Congress, where Congress has the ability to issue letters of marque and reprisal, by which a pirate or a privateer is authorized to capture an enemy vessel and present it in exchange for reward. I try to capture the spirit of Theodore Roosevelt and present it in exchange for reward. Very often I'm able to give back to the community in lots of ways too, but been traveling the country for 20 years. Performing as Theodore Roosevelt saved me from a career in Illinois Republican politics, and it's been a wonderful second career, great adventure. Performed in all 50 states, internationally, film and television. And for Teddy's 150th birthday at the White House for President and Mrs. George W. Bush. And it's been a delight as well to perform in nearly every major institution that's associated with Theodore Roosevelt's life and legacy. So quite humbling to try to bring him to life just a fraction of what he was.
As we'd done in Africa, but the game was so scarce and the jungle so dense, occasionally a howling monkey or a snake to eat, nothing in the way of real game. And as for fishing in the river was full of piranha, more likely to eat us than we they. One man drowned. Another Brazilian trooper, being caught for the second time stealing rations, he murdered one of his officers, ran off into the jungle, surely to his own demise, for we were surrounded by people of the Sinterlago tribes, the Wide Belt tribes, some of whom still practiced human cannibalism and hunted their human quarry with poison darts. I dashed my leg to the bone trying to save some canoes from being busted up, and shortly thereafter developed a malarial fever. The only thing we had for the treatment was quinine, quite insufficient. I lay for 2 days in the bottom of a canoe, 2 days and a night, while the entire safari was at peril. Our only chance for salvation, hoped for civilization downstream. I always took with me enough morphine to take my own life, in case of a terrible gun accident or bear mauling. I never wanted to be a fatal burden to my party, which I threatened to be on this particular trip. With a 105-degree fever, I recited over and over again in my delirium a favorite line from Coleridge. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. In Xanadu, sir, after 2 days of that, I would have shot me. But my son Kermit said, Father, I'm going to take you out of this jungle alive or dead, and it will be marginally easier to do so if you remain alive. With those words, Kermit saved my life. I recuperated. We completed our mapping. When we reached the Madeira, there a Brazilian army contingent awaited after we'd gotten through some of the more remote rubber tapping operations. And they informed us that while en route, the Brazilian government had decided to change the name of the Rio da Duvida to the Rio Roosevelt. The locals call it the Teodoro for short, and the Kermit, one of its tributaries. I put the family name on the map of South America.
As a little boy, I was bronchial. Theodore Roosevelt was famously asthmatic. While he was a little boy in the 1860s and suffering from his asthma, and medicine hadn't gotten all that good at treating that illness, I was raised in the 1970s by hippies who also didn't believe in traditional medicine, and so I would just lie down until I could breathe. But I was a voracious reader, a lover of American history, and as a little boy, the person of Theodore Roosevelt, the real individual, and that he'd been a sickly boy, that he built his body, that was an inspiration to me. And then from the time I was young, through my education in public school and college and more, the study of history, political science, and then a desire to do public service. That's been my life story since I was a little boy, and Theodore Roosevelt was a major character in that. But then it's appropriate here in the library in Spencer, Iowa, to acknowledge that books change people's lives. And the book, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, 1978 Pulitzer Prize winner by Edmund Morris, was gifted to me by my very insightful sister-in-law, Christmas 2001. After those horrible September 11th attacks, I've been prayerful and thoughtful about what I might do to help the country, frustrated by being involved in Illinois politics and not really feeling like I was getting much good done. And when I read that book, I knew the work of Hal Holbrook bringing Mark Twain to life for decades. So much so that while we know the writings of Mark Twain, when we think of him in the bone and flesh, I really do think we think of Hal Holbrook's interpretation. And my father is a hippie comedian. I should have mentioned that part of my interpretation is probably an homage to my father. I love to do a humorous show. It's also nice that historically we know that Theodore Roosevelt loved to entertain and tell humorous stories. And his daughter Alice said, "Father wanted to be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every christening." Well, between my background in showbiz, learning from watching my father on stage and being on stage a bit myself, and then reading that book and thinking that maybe my way to serve the country would be to bring this great American to life on stage and for classrooms and school children. It's where the origin of doing the character began in 2002. Continued to work in politics for a number of years until about 2008. And then my wife, family, daughter, and dog got into an RV in 2008. We toured the 48 continental states in honor of Teddy's 150th birthday. Flew to Hawaii and Alaska to perform there. Performed at the White House and really didn't look back. I have continued to move around the country, Tennessee, California, Colorado, now North Dakota. Every summer I'm performing in North Dakota as part of the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation. And then when the summer season is over, I tour the country and bring TR to life for audiences. And there's no place more fun to do so than here in Spencer, Iowa.
And far from living the strenuous life, I was a very weak and sickly child. I had asthma. Any of you who might have asthma, or if you've had asthma amongst your family or friends, you know what a terrible disease that is. To see a small child choking for breath and for life itself. Today, thankfully, the asthmatic child has the inhaler to restore breath, hopefully quickly. In my day, we had no such medicine. In my day, the treatment for asthma was worse than the disease. Can you imagine giving a small asthmatic boy a cigar to smoke? The idea was that coughing would stimulate my breathing. I was given bitter black coffee to drink, again as a stimulant. Became quite addicted to the bean as an adult. As your president, I drank 1.5 gallons of coffee each and every day.
These are a couple of things that are timely. It's kind of fun to play the calendar, too. I didn't mention it today, but today, we're taping this on October 16th. This is the date in 1901, just a month after becoming president and just 2 weeks after having moved into the White House, when Theodore Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to have dinner at the White House. The president of Tuskegee University. It was the first time that a man of color had been a dinner guest to the president of the White House. We go back to October 14th, and in 1912, that's the date that Theodore Roosevelt went and made an 80-minute speech after having been shot in the chest. Made a speech with blood pouring down his chest and a bullet in his chest, and he later wrote that if he was going to die, he was going to make that speech. And if, as he thought, it was but a mere flesh wound, because he checked his spittle, there wasn't any blood in his spittle. If it was just a wound, then he would have been ashamed to be a member of his regiment if he didn't go and do his duty to make that speech. So there's these wonderful little vignettes about Theodore Roosevelt that sometimes either the place that we're in to be able to salute some of the conservationists of Iowa, or the date on the calendar. Sometimes are those little things that are fun that become a part of a program that otherwise, might not be an everyday part of the what we call the Teddy Roosevelt Show. But I'm too ill-disciplined to have a script, so I really do walk into a place like the Spencer Library and think, oh, that's a nice audience. I wonder what stories I should tell them today. Because I've got about 60 hours worth of stories, nothing memorized in the way of a script, just access to all of these wonderful books again for people that are viewing that might come to the library. The Bully Pulpit by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's subtitled Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and the Golden Age of American Journalism. Some of the group that Theodore Roosevelt coined the phrase the muckraking press. Also David McCullough's Mornings on Horseback, Candace Millard's The River of Doubt, and the trilogy by Edmund Morris, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, Theodore Rex about the presidency, and 15 years later, The Colonel about the post-presidency. Really about 25 years of writing, so that Edmund Morris once said that after the publication of The Colonel, all in all, he was rather relieved that Theodore Roosevelt died when he was 60. For if he had lived any longer, it would have cost him another decade as his biographer.
I was good in some subjects, literature, history, natural science. Very poor or average in other subjects like mathematics and Greek and Latin. but it was natural science that was my greatest joy and pleasure. Why, even in lower Manhattan, a boy and his friends could find nature. Nearby Gramercy Park, Mr. Olmsted's great Central Park, with the American Museum of Natural History on the west side. The charter for that museum was signed in the Roosevelt family living room when I was a young teenager. My father recruited its first director. It was a playground for me and the other Roosevelt children. Why, even I'm glad that some of the youngsters, they've seen a movie called Night at the Museum, where there's actually a fellow that pretends to be me. Imagine that, a man pretending to be somebody he's not.
He said he was just an average man, but that he worked so much harder than the average man. And he wrote of the glory of work and the joy of living. I think he really was somebody who loved to throw himself into whatever work task he had. And he believed in living a joyful life, and that very often that meant being outdoors. So following in those footsteps, making sure that as I travel, I get out into the forest and swim in the lakes and that kind of thing. It's part of the fun of being Teddy Roosevelt as well.
They thought they were sending me to a dead end in my political career, and I thought I was going on one myself. I campaigned that election year 1900, 16,000 miles by train. And that's where Ding Darling and I first crossed paths in Iowa when he was on the beat. McKinley famously campaigned from his front porch in Canton, Ohio. We bested William Jennings Bryan, the boy orator of New York, making his second attempt at the presidency, and Adlai Stevenson, the former vice president from Illinois, the grandfather of the later Democratic nominee. When we were elected, Mark Hanna, chairman of the Republican National Committee, President McKinley's mentor, he told President McKinley, your job is to stay alive for 4 years. He told his fellow Republicans, don't you realize what you've done? That madman cowboy is but one life from the presidency. Sadly prophetic, those words.
Kim Stephen Willow. She was Kim Stephen when she was a Burning Hills singer. Every summer we have the outdoor Medora musical. Over 4 million people have seen that outdoor musical since its inception in 1965. About 120 to 125,000 people every summer. And for several summers, Kim Stephen was there from Spencer, Iowa. She fell in love with the band leader, Chad Willow, and so now she's Kim Willow. And I understand they're vacationing in Portugal with a second baby on the way. So Medora, because we have so many young people come as part of the musical and come to help work in the summertime, maybe it's like the tourism here, that some of the young people fall in love in Medora, North Dakota. Even some old people fall in love. So whoever's watching, young people, old people, come on out to Medora. Theodore Roosevelt wrote of his time in the Badlands that is where the romance of his life began. And of course, he wasn't speaking about romantic love in the sense of his wife, but just the romance of living. You can feel it in the Badlands of North Dakota. Oh my goodness, well of course I'm a professional, so my thanks to the city of Spencer and the library for an honorarium today. The opportunity to share a little bit of the inspiration of Theodore Roosevelt, his joy of living, to do so for an audience here that was composed primarily of our seniors, but also a family with some children. The opportunity to share that joy of living that Theodore Roosevelt had with individuals here. And sometimes I do emphasize the overcoming of hardship that Theodore Roosevelt had and experienced, that we all have that in our lives. We all have tragedy, we all have hardship, life knocks us down. And I think Theodore Roosevelt is one of those characters that inspires us to get back up again, to dust ourselves off and get back into the arena. A very famous little speechette, I didn't give it today, but the man in the arena. I update that to be the man or the woman in the arena. And I think sometimes there might be one or two people in the audience who maybe just a little serving of Theodore Roosevelt today is something that puts a little wind in their sails, makes them feel better about the challenges that they've got on their plate. So an honor and a pleasure to be here. 2 places, if I may. TeddyRooseveltShow.com, that has my schedule throughout the country, and Medora.com for the spring, summer, and fall opportunities to come and enjoy themselves in the Badlands of North Dakota.
Always a delight to come to Spencer, for I come to you from Medora, North Dakota, gateway to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, future home of Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, and since 1965, home to the Medora Musical.
Keep your eyes on the stars and your feet planted firmly on the ground. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. Do what you can with what you have, where you are. Bully.